Hello, hello. So it's been a minute, and it was brought to my attention that a post that I did before the new year kicked off. Um, I replied a little bit, but I had said that I would follow up with um, another version of an answer. And while I've had some great conversations with some people about it, I never actually did a reply. So we're a couple weeks into the new year now, and I thought it was a appropriate time to go ahead and respond. So the post that I'm referring to was the one requesting some feedback as to what your most valuable asset is. And while there was a lot of great answers, both on and off postings, most of the answers were from an external perspective, meaning a perspective of when I have this or because of that, then I'm happy. And there's no blame or shame or judgment in any of it. So I'm going to share another perspective. And it's okay if it doesn't resonate with whomever is listening to this, but it's worth taking a second to ponder on. You see, where a lot of people think that their greatest asset is their family or their financials or a version of thought process, I would argue, or rather propose, that your greatest asset is actually your time. You see, time, this concept of it, we're having this human experience. And in the human experience, there is a certain window of time. But the magical factor here is you don't know how long that is. Theoretically, humans can live 120 years, from one perspective, way longer, from one perspective, much shorter. Where we live, our diet, our lifestyle, our thought process, so on and so forth, plays a factor in those outcomes as well. And yet you could do everything exactly perfect. You could have your diet dialed in, you could do mindset practices, you could do breath work, you could do qigong, and you can do all these things that fill your life, fill your body, fill your experience. And yet, in a moment's notice, hit by a car and that ends that, or choke on an object, or any number of insert, right? And so a lot of people would hear that and say, well, that's why I enjoy my party. That's why I don't worry about the food I'm intaking or the drugs or alcohol and so on and so forth. And that's fine. That's another perspective on a way to live, right? The whole you only live once. And yet it reminds me of a quote that I often love to share by the Dalai Lama, and or of the Dalai Lama. And to paraphrase it slightly, he was asked, what of man, or what about man astonished him the most? And I kind of love this reply, because the reply was more or less, as I was not there, it was, what astonished him the most about man was that man will sacrifice his health in the pursuit of wealth, right? And then later sacrifice his wealth in an attempt to regain health. So that alone, quite a fascinating thing. When we're young, we think that we'll live forever, in a sense, right? That we have infinite amounts of time. And we're, in a lot of times, not everyone, of course, but in a lot of ways, a lot of times we feel invincible. We heal quickly. We, recover from this. We can do X, Y, Z. And then later in life, the level of party, the level of, for lack of another term to use at this particular second, the level of sacrifice, the piper needs to be then paid, so to speak, right? And so later in life, suddenly the joints hurt, or this illness happens, or this and this and this and this. And then in society, we say, oh, you're just old age, it's normal. And yet you see some people that are really old that have really focused on nutrition and mindset and breath work and things like this. And they're, seeming like able to run circles around some young people. Right. And and then we say, oh, they're just a unique individual, or they're weird, or they're, whatever. And, or they're not living and all this stuff. Right. Which brings me to the next part of his quote. He says, essentially, man spends his life living as if he's never going to die, but then dying, having never truly lived. And I find that quite fascinating in and of itself too, because again, each person has their own unique experience in this human meat suit, this time, in this version of living. And whatever perspective you believe is after this, if there is an after this, and so on and so forth, is fine. And how you choose to live your life in this moment is also yours to do. And so long as it doesn't directly impede my personal version of how I choose to navigate this experience, you do you, right? I have zero judgment. It's all love, total unconditional forgiveness, all of that, right? But what's fascinating to me is when people take for granted this moment. We live in a constant state of either in the past or in the future. That thing happened, and then an hour later, a day later, a week later, a month later, a year later, you're still toiling over it. And we've all done it. Sometimes we still do, even if we're doing the work, right? You catch yourself in a moment. And then a lot of times, maybe you're not there, but you're focused on moving forward. Okay, great. But you're focused on moving forward to the point where you're really forward. And the thing is there's a movie that I love to talk about, and I can't remember the name of it. And one of these days, I probably should just relook it back up, because it would probably be, of some note to share with somebody. But it's not about the movie. Essentially, it takes place a kid, in a small town, dreams about football, plays football, gets into high school football, so on and so forth. And the goal is to leave the small town and become a pro ball player. And that's the only focus. And the moment of truth is finally happening. He's getting the big ticket, and so on and so forth. And there's a big celebration at the end of the final game of the season for the small town. And there's a big celebration, and the guy's there at the party, which again is small town. So imagine what that looks like at this little doo-woppy kind of place. And he turns down the drinks and stuff, and he's like, I gotta go. I love you guys, and gets in his Mustang, and he's revving it, and he's going through. They got the perfect montage music, right? The whole thing. He's going along, and he's looking at everybody, and everybody's, and he has a moment where the pride and the ego kind of steps in. He revs the car a little bit, and then goes for it, neglecting that there was a stop sign right there. And as he goes for it, looks and gets blasted by a truck. Now, he didn't die, but his dream died in that moment, because he would never be able to play pro ball. And the moral of that story, well, there's a lot of them actually I could pick out, but for the purpose of today's conversation, in that moment, this man had nothing in his perspective other than ball. And now that life happened, suddenly he's lost. And we've all been there on some level in some way, right? Maybe not for our future goal of business. Maybe it's in relation. Maybe it's in general life thought process. Maybe it's in a game, whatever it is. You can find a way to relate to that, I'm sure. And the thing is he was lost. So he had to discover a new way to live. He had to discover that he was more than the sum total of the moments previous. He had to discover that he's still living because he has something to do. He has a purpose. And even though he knows not what that is at that point, on the broader scale, he has a clean slate to work from. And so it brings me to another point about time and life, which is, what if the worst thing that happened to you was the best thing that happened for you? If we're present in this moment and we stop looking backwards and we stop worrying about what's coming in the future and we really just live, no, we may not end up being the wealthiest person on earth, but you might be the richest. They say that the graveyard is the wealthiest place on earth. And they say that because they say that that is where all the dreams, all the wishes, all the inspiration went to die, right? The unfinished works. And that further goes to show we have this moment to play full out, whatever that looks like. And if your current situation, if you can honestly sit with yourself in silence, which a lot of people can't even do, but if you can, when you sit there and you can say, this is the best I got. And I'm not talking about your business growth. I'm not talking about, the financial and stuff. I'm talking about in life. Is this the best you've got? If it is, great, you're winning. If it's, I have more in me, I don't know what it is, but there's something I'm supposed to do, and I'm happy, that's winning, because you can choose to stay present in the moment that you have the only thing that's guaranteed. We say death is guaranteed, but death's a perspective. There's lots of ways to die. We say the human experience is fleeting. Sure, that might be true. Then again, one moment spent in honest truth, spent in full awareness, could be more valuable than a lifetime of story. So I just want to share that with you today, and also to reflect on the statement I just said a few moments ago about what if the worst thing that happened to you is actually the best thing that happened for you, because all those sum totals of moments, all those scars, those traumas, those core woundings, blah, blah, blah. If you can learn how to find yourself, how to be able to be at peace, to love all those scars, to see them not even as scars, but to see them as the sum total of beauty that has allowed you to become who you are right now in this moment, the moment you have. The moment for those of you who have listened this far, I appreciate you for listening to what I have to share, in the hopes that maybe it helps provoke a thought or answers some type of question for you. But if those moments allow you to become in service to another, or into service to the mass, in a way that says, I understand, in a way that says, you can let go of that story. You can become one within, to realize that you're not the body, and you're not the thoughts, nor are you the emotions. Perhaps there's something more in this moment that brings you back to an awareness that there is no good or bad. There just is. And I personally could go on for hours about story of trauma and blame and shame and victimhood and survivor, which in my opinion is another term for victim. I know some people are that have just heard that are like, ah, and that's okay. It's all right. Because here's the thing. I don't need to be someone that convinces someone of something else. What resonates, resonates. What doesn't, doesn't. What's for you, take with you. What isn't, leave behind. These are lessons and teachings that I have learned and am continually learning in the process, in the presence of now, in service to others. And so if I reach one person on one thought to provoke one instance that allows one person to rise into a new version of now, that's pretty cool. So I'll leave you with that. Blessings, and go forth in the now, and hopefully appreciate your most valuable asset now. Peace and love.